You guys here? Okay. It's very nice and very interesting to see the entire city management staff sitting in one room. I think that's pretty much everybody. I'm not sure there's anybody missing.
We're just missing the police chief. We're just missing police chief at this time. But I think they're coming in right now. He's coming through the door right now.
All right. This meeting this morning is designed as the first workshop, and the reason it's a workshop is we want to be free in our communication. So it's the first workshop on the strategic plan. I want to tell you something that I was told one time when I was doing a plan, and it was Kempner Trago was the company doing the work, and what their consultant said to us is, if you can't stand chaos, don't go in the room. Because when these things are done, sometimes people get upset. That's not what I want to see, or that's what I want to see. And you need to be able to bring that out and talk about it when the time comes to do that. So don't, if you sit back and you think, I don't understand that, or I don't like that, please raise your voice and say something about it. I don't think he'll mind being interrupted. This is Mr. Savak. Yeah. He's our consultant that has been hired to do this. Just for general purposes, he's also the consultant that the county has hired to do theirs. Yes, and I don't bring that out as a negative thing. I bring that out because I'm kind of hoping that means that maybe the county will do a strategic plan that is similar to ours, and that we can move forward together some way or another. Although I know he'll be controlled by the county management at the time he works on theirs. But so bring your voice forward if you feel like there's something you don't understand or something you don't want to see. Today's going to be an overview of the process for the people in the public that are here. I'm sorry that you're back there in the wings. I don't think we can make a big enough table for everybody to get at it. But we're also interested in getting input from you guys. At the appropriate time, you can bring things in if you'd like to. We're going to want input all along the process when this goes through from the public. We're going to do a lot of workshops. I don't think he's heard that one yet, but and try to get the public involved in it. It's the city strategic plan. It's not the staff strategic plan. It's very important to remember that. This is not the staff's strategic plan. The staff is going to develop it with our consultant, but the strategic plan is for the city, and it's for the residents of the city, and we have to keep that in mind as we go through the process, okay? So let me introduce our consultant. Oh, well, Brian, do you have something you want to say?
No, I just want to take an opportunity to thank everyone for being here. I know our staff, we're going to be looking forward to going through this process and getting some direction that's going to lead us into the future, you know, involving our residents, and direction from council as well, so that we can make sure we're aligning what operations and decisions we're making from a staff level to ensure we're fulfilling the strategic initiatives that are directed from council and from our residents as well. So thank you, and I'm glad to have Dr. Saviak here today, and I know he has other members of his team, but he's here today for this presentation, so thank you.
Okay, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but before this is over with, we're going to have a budget that matches the strategic plan. And it's going to be very difficult. I'm glad to see Ken sitting over there. But the whole process here is management control. Strategic plan is the top, and then you step down. And the ultimate for the council is to get to the budget that matches that strategic plan. And that's a long process. It's not going to happen this year. It's not going to happen in this year's budget that we prepare in September, but hopefully the following year we'll be able to make more steps into it. And then it'll be time to redo the strategic plan, so we'll have to do it over again. So, okay. Thank you. Sir, it's your turn.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Mayor Dodd. Really appreciate it. As the mayor described, this is just it's like a primer, a seminar, an orientation in strategic planning, what it is, how it works, what benefits will be received by doing it. And I fully realize there are some of you who probably are pretty experienced in it, and for you it'll just be positive reinforcement. For those who are learning more about it, it'll be really valuable, the information that you pick up, and it's just a really good way to start the entire process by getting a solid foundation in exactly what we're doing, how this works, and what you'll be doing with it. So I like that Drucker quote, you know, the best change is the change that we create, right? And there probably was a time in the public sector where we were very risk averse. and everything needed to be very status quo, right? But in the 21st century, things are pretty, we have a lot of change, and we're either going to react to change or we're going to lead change. And when we lead change and we do it successfully, we can get the most gains and the best results. It's also very useful for localities who are, like all of Florida really, trying to work through, hey, I have a growing community, they want a high level of service, I have limits on resources, what does the community want in the way of capital projects, programs, services, what are the priorities? And then how do I organize the entire city around that specific set of priorities or objectives, right? How do I align? You said alignment, Mayor. Alignment between the objectives that we're trying to achieve and our operations, so that all of our resources, equipment, personnel, technology, tools, facilities, everything is all about what we're trying to get done. We know that if we fail to plan, we typically plan to fail, and we perform as we plan. So planning is a really valuable tool in public management and for policymakers. If I had to summarize it, it's an opportunity to identify both threats and opportunities, and then minimize, mitigate, prevent the threats or the risks, and then optimize the opportunities that we have. And you're going to hear me use the word alignment several times. If there is a big disconnect between here's what we want to do and here's how we're operating, how successful are we going to be? This can be a two-way conversation today. In other words, there's a vast amount of experience and expertise and knowledge in the room. So,
not successful at all.
Not at all. No, organization and operations have to match objectives, right? And so the plan really ends up driving everything that you do, and it's a chance to create your future. And here's the great thing, the community and the city government, that you all write the plan together. And it's a multi-stage process, it's sequential for specific reasons. When you get to the workshop where we're actually identifying objectives and then major elements of action plans to achieve each objective, by then, there's going to be a lot more clarity and consensus because we've had a lot of opportunity to gather a lot of information and in different settings and through different tools to find out, well, what are the priorities? What are the objectives? What are the capital projects, programs, and services? But we actually, as a city government and a community, you write the plan together, so you own it. You identified the objectives. You thought through what the key elements of the action plans are. So what are the benefits to doing strategic planning, right? Well, it can help us clarify mission, vision, values, goals, and objectives. I'll give you a brief definition on each of those. Mission is the rationale of the organization, right? In other words, if for a police department, public safety, right? Your vision is who we can be in the future. Where are we traveling to? What's the destination? We can be one of the best cities in the state on A, B, and C, right? Goals are broadly stated long-term purposes, right? That we're gonna make this community known for its recreational resources, right? Values they influence how we think, talk, and behave in an organization. What are the values that are important in an organization? Because that influences how people are going to operate. And lastly, objectives. Objectives are SMART. They're specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-bound. If it doesn't have a number or percentage in it, it's not an objective. If it doesn't have a timeline to it, it's not an objective. Because you can't manage what you can't measure. And that's why with an objective, you might say, we do citizen satisfaction surveys, and we hope to see a 10% improvement in them over 12 months. Great, that's an objective. Specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-bound, right? It will help you best use limited resources. It tends to be a team builder, a culture builder, and a morale builder, because people choose public service to do something, right? In other words, individuals who commit their careers to public service, they had opportunities to do things in the private sector and maybe more financially lucrative positions, but they're in public service because they go, I care about my community. I like having a positive impact. I like changing lives for the better, right? And so we find that individuals, when they go, well, we have a winning game plan now on all these positive things we're going to do for the community we care about, it generates enthusiasm, right? Camaraderie. It's also good for the public, because the public goes, I know now what my city government is aiming to do. I understand what they're trying to accomplish. I have a decent sense of how they're going about it. I understand why they're making the decisions they're making, because they're trying to achieve all of these objectives, which produce all of these specific benefits for our community. Anticipatory government. In the 21st century, government is going to need to be proactive, not reactive, right? There's going to be a lot of change in the 21st century. Would everybody agree? Yes. Right. I mean, you think of the 20th century, and there were what? I mean, maybe, 66 years difference between the Wright brothers get a plane a few feet off the ground and we put a man on the moon, right? So the 21st century is going to be accelerated, right? And you're going to have disruptive change. And government is historically really good at what? Repetitive delivery of a high volume of standardized services. We do the same thing the same way for everybody the same day. But in the 21st century, government's going to have to adapt and innovate and change, because the 21st century is all about change, right? And change is going to happen one of two ways. Either it happened to us or we lead it, right? And you're going to get a chance to lead it. So this is a good definition of strategic planning. Knowing our mission, our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities, our threats, our stakeholders and how they think and feel, our history as an organization and a community, our capacity, in other words, what can we effectively execute? What should our objectives be, and then what strategies, action plans, implementation plans are we going to choose to fulfill or attain each of those objectives, right? So you can think of it in that sequential order right there. Research, which we've done a lot of to date. We've done a lot of research on the city government and the city. And we're going to be doing even more, right? And every opportunity anytime we have an activity or event in the strategic planning process, we're gathering information, data, metrics, information that's going to be useful. That helps us set a mission. You already have a mission. Now, you may say, you may take the position, no changes to the current mission. You may say, I want to revise it or adapt it slightly. You may say, I want a new mission. That's totally up to you, right? Flowing from mission, then are goals, the broadly stated long-term purposes, then the SMART objectives, strategies, how am I achieving that objective, tactics, what specific tactics enable strategies to operate, what specific tools, resources, activities am I employing for that strategy, I implement and I evaluate. I think this is one of the challenges for organizations who do any type of planning, whether it's strategic planning, urban planning, right? And that is, they generate a plan and then they put it on the shelf, right? In fact, I can usually walk into organizations around the state and I go, so where's the library? And there'll be like a third floor room and you can go in there and there's just shelves full of studies, right? And plans, right? And they may or may not have ever been operationalized, right? And so we only work with organizations who go, no, this plan will be achieved. This will be implemented. This will be done, right? Because we know the kind of real improvements and outcomes and positive results that can be achieved when you do that. Some of it today is going to be a little redundant. I apologize, but it's repetition is the engine of education. I know I have fellow educators in the room here who would say, yes, Dr. Saviak, that's correct. So, mission, long-term goals, annual objectives. Objectives can be more than 1 year, by the way, and this is obviously a multi-year plan. What is my action plan for the objective? You're going to have a one-pager summary implementation plan for every objective. Something you could hand the public and they could look at that one page and go, I have a pretty good idea of how you're going to get this done, right? However, all of you are subject matter experts in each of your areas, and you may say, well, on top of that, I may need to develop a more detailed implementation plan in addition to the summary action plan in order for us to fulfill that objective. So bake that in, factor that in. And then, of course, everything is measurable, right? So every quarter, the objectives you're responsible for, you're turning in a progress report to the city manager. Here's the objective. Here's what progress has been made, right? And it's quantifiable, it's measurable. It's not, I think we're doing great. Feels good. It's this percentage, this number. It enables the leadership to understand, are there any resources we need to supply you? Are there any obstacles we need to help remove so you can achieve that, right? But it is constantly keeping your administrative elected leadership aware of where are we at on those objectives. So when I'm out in the public and when I'm interacting with constituents and they go, hey, I saw that this was one of your objectives. What's going on with that? They know, right? They know. And there's accountability, oversight, transparency. Real quick, we get strategic planning from the U.S. military experience, right? And they try to plan for all different types of scenarios. And you're going to keep hearing the word alignment from me this morning. The mayor mentioned it earlier to me, and I'm going to end today by showing a video which is an excellent example of leading strategic change and why alignment is key to being successful in doing that. So what can happen in government, or really in the corporate world too, is they get married to that organizational chart, and they get married to, well, but we've always done it this way, right? And we've always done it this way is great if it's an empirically validated best practice. In other words, all cities worldwide do it that way because it is the best way to do it. No problem, right? But a strategic plan, in order to achieve the results that you want, may involve, I need to do some things differently organizationally and operationally in order to get the results that I want to get. So I always say to local governments, factor that in, that some things structurally and operationally may need to be altered if that's what you really want to achieve. And that's a good thing, So we're really trying to achieve the best fit between the organization and its environment, the city government, the city that you serve. And it helps chart a course for you so that you're best able to serve, succeed for years to come, right? Remember 2020 and the pandemic? Yes. Yeah. As soon as it started, I said two things are going to happen. One, it's going to be an accelerator of innovation because people are going to have to do what? Make some changes, right? So some restaurants said, great, just pull into the parking lot, we'll come out to you, right? And then a lot of classes went online, right? And so we can all give all kinds of examples. I was able to identify the organizations in my region that weren't going to survive the pandemic because they didn't have a leadership and a culture and a team that could change, adapt, and innovate. And that's the 21st century. In other words, you really are going to have to be adept at changing and innovating. Often, because you're going to have all these disruptors, right? Right? I don't know the exact year it's coming, but it's within our lifetime. We're going to be on I-95, and you're going to look over at the car next to you, and there's not going to be a driver in the driver's seat, right? So you're going to see transformational change in the 21st century, and you really want to be proactive as an organization. And government can do this. Don't let anyone tell you that government has to be reactive or status quo. There are many success stories worldwide of local governments leading positive change. It can be done. It can be done. Once again, it takes leadership, culture, team, a winning plan, right? So when you go through a strategic planning process, it helps really unify the organization around a shared mission, right? Everyone now knows and understands what's the mission, the vision, the values, the goals, the objectives, what are my roles and responsibilities in it? Are there plenty of organizations that have missions and it may be available like up on their website or social media, but if you actually surveyed the entire organization, people couldn't tell you what it is? That happens. That happens, right? Or you have an organization where different people on the team think there's a different mission. How well does it work when people are rowing in different directions really hard at the same time in the same boat? Yeah, so that's what's great is it unifies the organization around, the mission and a specific set of values, goals, and objectives, so that that's what the organization's doing. In other words, I once saw a great experiment by the head of the business school at Rollins College. He would bring in executives from companies, and before he would bring them in, all the executives would tell them, oh, we definitely know we're all on the same sheet of music. We know exactly what we're doing and everything. He said, sounds great. And he'd park them all at individual computers. And then he'd go, what's the mission? What's the vision? What are the values, right? And then they'd print out, and it was the 90s, so like the printer would go, you know what I mean? And then he'd pull them out. Now, if he got back all 20 and they were all similar or identical, probably good thing, correct? But he found plenty of times, and these were actually fairly successful companies, of course underperforming, where he got back printouts and they had very different answers, to those questions, right? So, my point is, it's actually possible for an organization to operate for years without a shared mission. You don't want to be that. So the city of Sebastian is ahead of other organizations in that you actually have a mission statement, right? We have 67 counties, and we have several hundred constitutional officers, and we have 67 school districts, and we have, I think, 400 plus cities. And believe it or not, there are plenty of organizations, public, private, nonprofit, they don't even have a mission statement, right? So you have a mission statement. And of course, once again, you're in charge. You're charting your destiny. You're defining your future. So you may go, I love what we got. I'd like to revise it. Like I had one, and they had like 2 paragraphs. They got it down to like 8 words, And it's really, it's up to you. But is it a good thing to revisit the mission statement every once in a while? Yes. It could never hurt. Yeah, it could never hurt. So we do a ton of research during this process, and that's why we've done a lot of research on the city and the city government. That's why there will be interviews with the administrative elected leadership. That's why there will be an electronic survey. That's why there will be community events to engage with citizens, because all of this is giving us information that's valuable and meaningful to the plan, right? I always say objectives select strategy. Strategy drives tactics. You implement, you evaluate. Strategy is how we win. The tactics are what specific activities do I have to do to win, right? So if I can utilize a public safety example, right? I could go, well, my goal is, lower crime rate. Okay, great. That's a goal. It's broadly stated. The objective is I'm going to reduce crime by 10% in 24 months. Measurable, correct? Right. The strategy might be, you know what? We find that 5% of the offenders commit over half of the offenses. And so if we were to target our time, energy, effort, and resources to that subset of repeat offenders, we probably could drop the crime rate, right? I mean, this is not a radical idea. It's been proven in cities, counties, and states across the country, around the world, really. And the tactics might be, we're going to concentrate on the career criminals, and we're going to closely work with prosecutors, and we're going to make sure they get lengthy sentences so that they're not back out the next day victimizing people. But any strategy that you choose has to be grounded in reality, right? Just like your objectives. In other words, what's the capacity of the organization? What is the environment that we operate in, right? I was once talking with an official from a city, and they are known for a very high quality of life. And they have a very large retirement population, which is great, right? But their vision was they believed they could make that city into the next Silicon Valley. And I said, I just don't know if that's within the zone of feasibility. In other words, by looking at your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm saying, build on your strengths. But by doing that SWOT analysis, you can figure out, well, what could we excel at, right? And maybe what should we not try to spend all of our time, money, and effort on, because it's just not going to be the best use of our limited resources, because that's not something that's the best fit or necessarily achievable or feasible for our city, if that makes sense, Cities are just like companies. They have to choose a market position. They have to choose a brand. They have to choose a plan for future growth, right? In terms of, revenue, and in terms of let me say it this way, in terms of long-term physical sustainability. That's what I mean when I say, the future. And so in that way, cities are kind of like companies too, I'll give you another way. Cities now compete against each other, correct? Yeah. They compete against each other for what? Companies, capital, employees, talent, right. Tourists, right. It's what's playing out across America right now. The federalism of our founding fathers is in active operation. Some states are losing capital companies, residents, and tourists. Other states, you might be living in one, right? We are constantly gaining capital companies, residents, and tourists, correct? So that's what I mean. Government, to your point, whether it's employees or, in other words, government now competes, against other governments, well, even against non-governmental entities, because people can go, well, if I want that service, I don't necessarily have to get it from you, correct? Right. In other words, is every child in Florida absolutely mandated to be in a public school today? No. No. In other words, people can often today, there was a time when the public sector had a monopoly, and government could say, well, we're the only folks in town who do A or B, correct? But today, people can get A or B with few exceptions from other alternatives, correct? And even if it's not like getting the service from a different provider, people always have options. I mean, they can do what? Well, I don't like the county, so I'm moving to the city. Or I've asked the city to annex us. Or we're going to form our own city and incorporate. Or we're going to ask the city or county to engage with a private sector or nonprofit provider to deliver that program or service, right? Or we could stop providing that service or reduce the level of that service or increase the level of that service. And so cities and counties today have to be, as nimble and agile and dynamic and forward thinking and proactive as they can be, because you actually compete, you actually compete. And when you compete, you want to win, correct? The plan helps you win, right? Those of you who've had a lot of success in life, you typically probably found that all of it wasn't accidental, correct? Yes. Yeah, long-term success or sustained success tends to be a planned event, right? And so, the strategic plan helps you figure out, who am I, what should I do, who am I not, what should I not do, and it integrates the entire organization. It's the difference between 100 individuals playing instruments and the sound of a symphony, right? Everyone is playing together, right? You've got to select objectives and strategies for them and tactics for them, that will attract resources, and there will be funding opportunities based on certain objectives you select. Could be federal or state money, could be the community is willing to say, hey, if you would increase that level of service, we're willing to pay for that, right? In other words, you can attract resources by articulating, here's what we're trying to get done and here's how we're doing it. Now, you may say, but Dr. Sabiak, our objectives are picked for us in the public sector. And to an extent, that's true. Constitution, state statute, city charter, ordinances, I get it. But is there a difference between public safety here and public safety in Detroit? In other words, here you may say, hey, public safety is we have the lowest crime rate possible, right? And we deliver a high level of service. Whereas in Chicago or a major city, they also have a police department, but what? Higher crime rate. Right. In other words, they have the same mission or goal, which is public safety, but they're not approaching it the way that you do. In other words, you go, yeah, but in the city of Sebastian, people expect this, and I'm going to make sure that I deliver it to that level. Does that make sense? And so that's my whole point is cities and counties across America and across the world, you really can pick and choose what you're going to, what you're going to do and how you're going to do it and to what level and to what metrics. Does that make sense? Yes. Right? And like I said, you're seeing that play out across the country right now with, who'd have thought in our lifetimes California would be losing population? First time in U.S. history, but what? They're losing population, right? That's the one thing people in America can always do is vote with their feet, right? And companies are not mandated to stay anywhere. They may say, hey, I'm relocating, So you also always look at, well, what does the community expect or demand? But also, too, you self-initiate. In other words, you go, I think this is an important objective for our community. I think this will help improve the long-term quality of life for our community. Great, let's do it. This is your opportunity to do that, to lead successful change. If I can continue with the analogy with the private sector, and I fully realize both are very different in some significant ways, but it's good for government to think in these terms too. It's never bad. What is our business? Who's our customer? What does the customer consider to be of value, right? Like when Rick Baker became the mayor of St. Petersburg, at his first senior staff meeting, he said, I had a constituent complain to me about a big crack in the sidewalk outside their home. How long does it take to repair that? And what was the answer?
3 years.
You're really good. But the first answer was, we don't know. So he said, right, why don't you know? I want you measuring that, correct? And then when they did measure it, it was 2.5, right? But by the time he left office, right, it was 2 days. And the person who had called it in, there would be a picture, right, of the repaired sidewalk that got texted to the citizen who called it in. So kind of a real-time service delivery, right? So he made speed a metric for government. In other words, we can improve upon how quickly we provide a sidewalk repair. Small example, but still, that's what citizens in St. Petersburg said. I consider that to be valuable. In other words, if you can expedite how quickly that gets repaired in my neighborhood, I think you should be doing that. I think that should be a focus for you. So it is helpful to think of citizens as customers, and are we providing the highest level of customer service, and are we giving them the results that they seek? So during the strategic planning process, we discuss vision, which I mentioned. Who do we want to be in the future? What's the destination of the journey? So for instance, I had a friend, he took over a very large municipal utility in Florida. And he came in, this is a couple decades ago, he came in and he said to the staff, he said, we're going to win the #1 municipal utility in America. And of course, at that time, that seemed like a real ambitious goal, correct? And people were kind of like, I don't know if that's doable, right? But within several years, what was achieved? They did it. They did it. And the moment that he organized the organization around that, achieving that, correct? And all of my people, my culture, my supervision, my tools, my equipment, my facilities, my technology, everything is going to be about, being #1. They were able to get there. Your values as an organization, it's always helpful for now you may say, well, we all have the same set of values here. Honesty, transparency, hard work, customer service, go down the list, right? But it's good to put them on paper, right? And it's good to articulate them. Then you're going to set objectives, and once again, objectives are smart. If it has a number in it, and it has a timeline in it, it's an objective. So customer satisfaction will improve by 10% as measured by our surveys in 12 months. That's an objective. As you notice, it's going from the broad to the more narrow and defined, right? How do you succeed with strategic planning? Do you have to have leadership who says, we really believe in this? Yes. Does the organization have to say, we buy in?
Yes.
Absolutely. You need to pay attention to resource constraints. You can't, everything is not necessarily achievable, correct? You may say, well, that'll be $1 billion. Okay, well, I don't have $1 billion, so let's rethink this. Your capacity is key. Can we effectively execute that? Once again, alignment, we're connecting ends to means, we're matching objectives to operations, and it also helps you prioritize. I can tell you, if your strategic plan has 100 different objectives, it's like a Christmas wish list. It's like everything in the world to everybody. You're probably going to have difficulty implementing and achieving that, correct? So you are going to have to make choices in this process. Now, let me be clear. Can you always do a follow-up strategic plan because you go, I couldn't tackle all those objectives at once? Of course. So I would look for a manageable set of objectives that match your capacity to succeed, you know, and avoid well, let's list everything under the sun kind of Christmas wish list. No, be thinking about what's feasible, what's doable. So strategic planning is like any other tool of public administration. It can either work wonderfully, but it can also fail. And it's really the same list of suspects that stop us from succeeding or innovating every single time, right? Well, it wasn't rooted in the research. Yeah, that'll create a problem. We didn't pick the right vision, mission, values, goals, and objectives. That'll do it. The leadership was uninterested in it and not committed to it, not dedicated to it. That'll do it. We had objectives in there that weren't measurable, right? Like people would say, I'd say, well, how's it going? And they would say, I think it's going great. Okay, well, I need a number, right? I need to be able to measure. We picked the wrong action plans for the objectives. Even if we had the right objectives, we had the wrong action plans, right? And then lastly, this stops positive change in any organization if we lack the leadership or the culture or the team, or we leave the wrong policies, procedures in place, right? We don't provide the right resources. All of that's going to create problems for you. So let me walk you through the kind of the step-by-step of strategic planning. You know, the first thing you're considering is, you know, who am I? What do I do? Right? What's our mission? What's our vision? What are our values? What are our goals? What are our objectives? Right? You already have a mission statement. Once again, what's the mission statement? Why do we exist? That's a mission statement. In other words, why are we here? What's our purpose as an organization, right? Then you want to be thinking about what kind of problems and opportunities face us, right? How do we optimize the opportunities? How do we solve or mitigate the problems, right? And I think it's helpful to think over time, because sometimes there's something that happened in the community or organization 5, 10, 20, 30 years ago that might be instructive or helpful to know or consider. I always say think about missions that might attract resources. And then you do a SWOT analysis. I'm sure plenty of you have done SWOT analysis before, correct? You literally write out, here are our strengths. Here are our weaknesses. Here are opportunities. Here are our threats. Now, could some of them be the same? Right, a weakness could be an opportunity, right? But when you have that knowledge of what strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats you face as an organization and a community, it helps you better select the right objectives and implementation plans, right? What's also key to strategic planning is going, am I getting the perspectives and information and ideas of everybody who should be involved, right? Government sometimes calls them stakeholders, but it means employees, it means citizens, right? And what do they want to see? And what would they pick as mission, vision, values, goals, and objectives, right? Sometimes there's going to be good consensus on that. Sometimes there could be differences, correct? You know, I always use that one line, you know, from Appleby, you know, if I do this, who will I make mad, how mad? Who will I make glad, how glad, right? You know, in other words, everything in the public sector, really everyone is a stakeholder. In other words, if you have like a a privately held family business, you know, everyone in the world is not a stakeholder, correct? You own it, you control it, you run it. How about in the public sector?
Everybody.
Yeah, everybody's a stakeholder, yeah. I always ask organizations to think too about historically what has gone on and, you know, maybe what successes they've had in the past, what challenges they've had in the past. You know, in the past, what have they looked at in terms of mission, goals, values? The past can be instructive, you know, and we shouldn't, in other words, even with all the change that's going on in the 21st century, every organization has a history, correct? You know, the city of Sebastian didn't start today, correct? It started a century ago, right? And so I think that's helpful to kind of, you know, there are some times where there are analogies, situations from the past that you go, you know, there are some lessons from that we could actually apply today, you know? Institutional knowledge, you know, our experience as an organization. You better be right about capacity, you know? In other words, you've got to be able to effectively execute, you got to be able to pull it off, right? And so it's certainly a good idea to pick objectives that will challenge the organization to do better, to work harder, to work smarter, but also to be realistic. You know what I mean? Don't go too far, you know? Because if you greatly exceed your capacity, you're simply not going to be able to realize those objectives, right? So certainly have some good ideas, but make sure they're ideas that are feasible and achievable. Yeah, so once again, what's the definition? Hey, given our mission, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, stakeholders, history, capacity, and resources, which objectives should we select, and what strategies and action plans would implement them? This sounds a little redundant, but if you don't manage strategically, you will not succeed in strategic planning. So the two of them fit together, strategic plan, strategic management, right? And so you're actually going to be creating, you know, action plans for each of the objectives, strategy, tactics, timeline, resources, personnel, metrics, right? And then you're going to be evaluating, right? You're going to be evaluating as you're working towards the achievement of the objective. That's called a process evaluation. And I'm actually trying to make sure that the planned program and the implemented program match up, things are on track, people are doing what they should be doing, when they should be doing them, how they should be doing them, right? And then at the end of an objective, you do an outcome evaluation, which is, okay, well, what were the measurable gains that we achieved, right? That percentage, that number. So strategic planning is different than just like normal day-to-day operations, right? Because it involves the leadership, the entire organization. It's not short-term, it's long-term. It's trying to figure out the best fit between who we are and what we do, our environment and what we could achieve. And I would just say these four verbs mean a lot to this. Define, align, implement, and evaluate. That's what this is all about. Defining the mission, vision, values, goals, and objectives. Then aligning your organization, your activities, your policies, procedures, technology, equipment, personnel, culture, facilities around them. And then implementing, and then evaluating. By the way, is it a bad thing if we don't achieve an objective? No. Or maybe it underperforms. Why is that not a bad thing?
Because you know where you're going. know where you were and then where you're going, and you can measure in between.
Absolutely.
And you can also look at it and analyze what's the reason that you didn't meet it.
Excellent. You want to be a learning organization with a culture of continuous improvement. But I don't want anyone to ever beat themselves up. In government, sometimes, historically, the view was zero risk and we can't make any mistakes. I'm sorry. Mistakes are normal, natural, predictable, helpful, valuable. As long as we learn from them, we don't repeat them, right? And it teaches the organization, it grows employees, it helps us do better, but I'm sorry, perfection is not a standard you should hold yourself to. Some things are gonna overperform, some things are gonna come in right where you wanted them to, and some things may underperform, and as long as you do exactly what you said, the analysis, and you go, what was the cause, what was the problem, what's the solution? As great, right? Because this is not the last strategic plan in the history of the city of Sebastian. So you can either correct in real time, right, while you're still working on it, or you can go, you know what, let's hold off on this one and include this in the next strategic plan and address those issues so that we have a better shot at success and don't repeat what occurred. I'm sure several of you have been for the private sector, correct?
Yes.
Right. Did everything work out perfectly every day in business?
No. Quite the opposite.
Right. Right. Jack Welch tells a great story. In the 1980s, he had a team, he was the CEO of GE, and he had a team come up with a brilliant idea. And of course, it was all about being green and eco-friendly and environmental, right? But if anybody remembers the 80s, and there's at least one or two of us in here who do, was that the major focus of consumers in the 80s to buy green? No, that kind of green, yeah. So what happened was people didn't end up buying the product. But Jack Welch knew this was a great product and the team did an excellent job, but my timing was wrong. It was the wrong window of opportunity, you know? And he knew, he said, one day this kind of product will make us a ton of money at GE, but not now. So how do you think he handled it? Do you think he called the team in and said, hey, don't ever do this again? Or do you think he said, well, let me just ignore it and pretend like that never happened? No. He called all the employees together and they threw a party. And he celebrated the team who had come up with this winning idea. And he stood up and he congratulated them in front of everybody and commended them for being innovators. And he just said, you know what, we're ahead of the market. We're ahead of the customers. You know what I mean? It's like the old Henry Ford line where he said, you know, if I'd have asked the customers, they would have said, build a faster horse, right? Sometimes you can be too far ahead, you know? And so I'm a big believer in, if you want to encourage a culture of innovation in government, you've got to reward it, recognize it, celebrate it, but you can't have people going, I can never make a mistake and I can never have any risk, right? Because that's the price of innovation and progress, right? And so we want to encourage that kind of thinking. So we're going to be engaging stakeholders. We're going to be assessing our environment, right? Once again, you have a mission statement, and you may very well go, I want to keep it exactly the way it is. I want to tweak it. I want to maybe change some major elements to it. I want a brand new one. It's totally up to you. You're designing your future. You're writing it, you know? And then once again, we're aligning, once you figure out mission goals and objectives, you're aligning your operations to make sure that they are achieved. Then we implement, and we're measuring while we're implementing to make sure that we're achieving, and it's on track, and the program's performing as it should. And then, of course, at the end, we're evaluating. Hey, did I achieve the results? Did the program produce the intended objectives, right? You do two types of evaluation. You're evaluating as you're executing the program, service, technology, equipment, whatever it is, the objective. And you're utilizing that feedback to make any necessary changes at the time. And then, of course, you evaluate at the end, right? In other words, did we actually capture the result or the gain or outcome that we wanted? And just be prepared for this. There are going to be plenty of objectives that you go, success. We sought to do this by X% improvement, and we got it. But there could be some things that don't work out exactly that way, right? And I'll just quickly discuss, when things don't work out, it's one of two reasons. It's either theory failure, which is I was wrong about the problem and the causes, so I picked the wrong solution, right? Or it could be program failure, which is I did not maintain program fidelity. I planned the program. The program that was planned is based on best practices and model programs, but I allowed it to drift off track while it was being delivered. We brought people into the program who the program really doesn't meet their needs. We changed policies and procedures in the program in ways that were not productive or helpful, right? It got off track. And I'm sure you've seen both of them, you know? The theory failure example I often give to people is back in the 90s, there was an omnibus crime bill that was passed by Congress that provided massive federal funding to localities and states and localities around the country. And one of the things the federal government does is they provide, like 1/3 of your dollars are federal state money, you know? And they provide money to local and state governments around the country to experiment, try new programs and see what works and what doesn't. And then they do evaluations and they catalog and keep that works, that doesn't, so that way when we get a phone call from a city, county, or state, we can say what?
I couldn't hear that.
Once they have provided federal grant funding to different cities or counties to start and run a certain program, they make sure it gets measured. And then when another city or county calls up after they've done, let's say, 100 of these, they're able to tell that city or county what?
What's the objective of the measurement?
Right, and if you want to do this, here's how you would do it. Or they actually are able to tell them, this doesn't work. This doesn't work. We've grant funded it in 100 different cities around the country, and what? It never worked, right. So they came up with like a great idea in the 90s. And we know that providing young people recreational opportunities and pro-social, healthy activities generally keeps them on the right path in life, correct? Yes. But they came, in that bill, they grant funded a program called Midnight Basketball. And it seems like a neat idea, but a lot of the cities tried it, where they would operate midnight basketball programs. Well, what the cities actually found happened was most juvenile crime occurs during the day. And you know where I'm going with this now. And so what happened was the kids were skipping school. They go burglarize unoccupied residential homes, right? Go pawn it, go home, take a nap, and then go show up to the basketball court at midnight. Where should minors be during the day?
At school.
Aha. So they had if you don't diagnose, you can't treat. And really, what was the real problem going on? Starts with a T. Truancy. That was it. And so what should we have targeted? Not saying that midnight basketball is a bad idea, but what should we have really focused on? Right, exactly. And so had we concentrated on truancy, it's really hard to burglarize someone's home while they're at work when you're at a desk in class.
Yeah.
It's just a lot harder, right? So that was one of the takeaways from the program eval of Midnight Basketball was, yes, recreational activities and sports are very positive for young people, but after they have been in school for the day, correct? Or while they're in school, right? Great, right? And then a program failure example I'd give is, let's say you were running a job training program. You're trying to move people from welfare to work, and they need job skills, right? And so the program is really all about just teaching job skills. It doesn't address any other issue for people other than making sure they're skilled in certain professions so they can acquire long-term gainful employment. But halfway through, someone on your board says, but wouldn't it be a great idea if we also admitted people who are just being released from state prison and even though they have untreated behavioral mental health issues and in other words, they have all these other issues that this program doesn't deal with because the program only teaches job skills. The program doesn't provide mental behavioral health care, correct? And even though it was well-intentioned that you wanted to admit them to the program and see if you could help them get a job, you changed the program midway through the program, correct? And so what's your success rate now going to look like? Right, because all your program does is job skills. Your program doesn't do, let me treat mental behavioral health issues, correct? So that's why I say you need to maintain fidelity or program integrity, because then when you evaluate it, you know, okay, this worked and here's why, and we stuck to the original plan, and because let me tell you, if it works and you changed it, you'll never know if the original program would have worked or not because you didn't stick to the original program. There are always challenges in evaluation, but let me tell you, everything we do in public administration is measurable. Either inputs, outputs, outcomes. In other words, what we do in the public sector is not impressionistic art. Well, I might like it, I might not. I might see this in it, I might not. It's not subjective, it's all objective, right? There's a number. So you have to get the right data and the right performance metrics. And you also have to give it time. There are certain issues, by the way, you're not going to see progress on immediately, correct? But if you are disciplined and dedicated and you stick to the best practice solution, over time, what will occur? Success, right? By the way, too, sometimes in government, a cost avoidance or preventing a problem it is an objective. Sometimes we often think of results as, I got this much more money in, or I got, I sped up the time that citizens needed to get a permit or some other service from local government. But let me tell you, sometimes success is I prevented a problem or I avoided a cost. We don't always calculate like that in the public sector, but we should, So in terms of measures, I would, inputs are consumable resources, people, money, assets, equipment used to run the program. Outputs are your units of service. So if you're running like an after-school program to improve reading, 200 kids went through it, all you can say is 200 kids went through it. That's an output measure. Now, let's use the same analogy. 200 kids and they're going through the after-school program aimed at enhancing their reading comprehension. What would be an outcome for that? Excellent, excellent. There was a pre-test on reading and a post-test, and they made gains. They were reading at this grade level before the program. They're now reading at the appropriate grade level. Right. And generally, most of the objectives you're going to select are outcome-oriented, right? Outcome-oriented. So be thinking in those terms. Yeah, and you've got to pick the right metrics for your objectives. If you don't measure it correctly, you may have the right objective, you might have the right action plan, but you're not really going to be able to understand exactly what you wanted to, what was achieved and what was not, because you didn't measure it correctly. I mentioned this earlier, I just repeat it again. It's okay if everything doesn't work perfectly, right? The best leaders allow us the freedom to fail, right? Because they want us to fail up, fail forward, right?
You only fail if you try.
I'm sorry?
You only fail if you try.
Right. Yeah, failure means you're actually trying to do something.
Exactly.
Failure means you were trying to make something better.
Right.
Failure means you were actually making decisions. Mm-hmm. Right. So you know, we can't paralyze ourselves or the organization with this fear of, well, what if everything doesn't go perfectly? Well, I have news for you. There are going to be things in your strategic plan that hit right on the mark. There are going to be things that overperform. And then there are going to be some things that underperform. And that's okay. That's okay. Perfection is not our standard, right? I just wanted to briefly say something about leading change, because strategic planning does involve leading change. And you're probably familiar with John Kotter. He's got an 8-step model. He said this is key whenever you're doing any kind of change in any organization, anywhere on the planet. Follow these 8 steps. First one, do people need to know that change has to happen now? Right, because if they don't feel any kind of immediacy or urgency, what will they do? They won't change, they'll put it off, right? They'll say, no need to do it now, right? Secondly, change doesn't happen because the CEO of the company sends out an email, right? You better win hearts and minds. You better have a whole team committed to the change. You better have a whole coalition, right? And that could be both internal and external, the community and the city government working together. There better be a compelling vision. In other words, people have to be able to see, here's how much better things will be if we do this. Here's the purpose of the journey. Here's the destination. Like I said, my friend's example with the municipal utility, he said, we're going to be number 1. So everyone understood what the vision was, right? And then strategy. Strategy is, how do we do it? How do we win, right? During a normal day, when you're not changing anything, do you still have to do plenty of communication with the team? Right. Now, how about when you're making changes? Do you have to do even more communication? Right, for very simple reasons, you know. The human brain is very energy efficient, and so the human brain tries to always default to known knowledge, you know, knowledge that's already stored up in the library here, to try to figure things out. And if you're getting people to do something differently, something new, and then, or do something differently, it takes more time, energy, and effort, you know, for this whole process to work. And then sometimes people too can people have anxiety about change? Yes. Right. In other words, my whole point is that's like hardwired into us. You know what I mean? As human beings and as cultures and as organizations. And so, as Captain Abrashoff says, and It's Your Ship, you got to talk people through it. You know what I mean? You got to reduce that fear and anxiety. You got to coach them and support them and listen to them and know that they may be a little nervous about taking on something that's ambitious, right? You've got to empower everybody. And your job then is to remove obstacles and supply support so that people can actually get done what you want to get done. Why do you want to have some early wins in the strategic planning process? This is a 5-year plan, but why might it not be a bad idea to have at least a couple objectives that you can get done in the first year? Excellent. Momentum is a positive force in the organization, correct? and it encourages and inspires people. When, you know, nothing sells like success, right? It fires up the people who are already on board. Maybe it gets the people who are sitting on the fence to, you know, on the team. And then the people who were doubting it, maybe they now start to go, well, you know, this is working. Build on your progress, protect your progress, push forward, and eventually change can become your culture. I've worked with organizations where year one, just because of prior leadership and culture, they were hyper allergic to change, right? Don't ever do change, status quo, we've always done it that way, that kind of thing, correct? But you know, with the right, when they see success and with the right coaching and leadership and culture, that same organization, you can walk in there today and the same people during a meeting, when you go, does anyone have any new ideas? All the hands go up. You know, it will take time for people to buy in, you know, and that's okay. But that's called leadership, you know. And it can become the culture. And by the way, you want that to be the culture. You want a culture where people raise their hands and go, I have an idea, right? I always say this too. You always want people to say, raise their hand and say, I made a mistake. That's a good culture. I like this one as a leader, when people raise their hand and go, Joe, you made a mistake. That's helpful and healthy to me, you know? You know, not every innovation is going to work out perfectly, but you want a culture of continuous improvement. So what will you be doing over the next several weeks? And we'll be doing individual interviews, I think April 15th and 16th. So before April 15th and 16th, like here's your homework, right? Be thinking about a SWOT analysis for the organization. What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What are our opportunities? What are our threats? And what will be interesting about it is we typically will find the same theme comes several different times, you know what I mean? And then you go, I should pay attention to that, right? A number of people mention that. Okay, good. And by the way, every organization has strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, right? It's normal, natural, expected, predictable. There's nothing wrong with it, right? I would be thinking about the history of the city and the city government. We'll be doing things to engage the community. The mayor and council are really strongly committed to making sure that we engage the community, and we're hearing your ideas and input and recommendations, and so there'll be plenty of opportunities to engage the community. But as we talk with you, we want you to be thinking in those terms already, like, well, what am I hearing from the community? What do I think the community is telling us about what we should offer, not offer, do, not do? Have a real good understanding of your capacity. In other words, what can I achieve and what can I not achieve? Because we want something that's doable and achievable. It could be a stretch objective, like, hey, we're gonna have to do more to get that done, but it's not gonna be, that's crazy, it can never be done. Be thinking about objectives. Now, your objectives can be for the entire city, they can be for your department, they can be for another department, right? But once again, objectives are specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-bound. Be thinking about, well, if I had to write a one-page action plan on how to achieve that objective, what would it be, right? And we sent out to you examples of everything I'm talking about, right? Like a generic action plan, right? And we sent out an example of an action plan for an objective, and this is with a social services organization that I work with that on their strategic plan. that serves a large region in the state of Florida. And then here's an example of like a progress report, that you'll turn into the city manager, like quarterly. Here are my 3 objectives, and here's a summary paragraph on where we're at. Here's how it's going. Here's what I need. Here's what's working, right? Accountability, progress, oversight, being able to report by the numbers, that's really key to this. Then I also gave you an implementation issues checklist. In other words, if I'm changing a program or service or adding a program or service or doing a capital project, what are all the different issues I have to think through from start to finish in order to be successful, So the process, and I apologize if I'm at all redundant today, but it bears worth repeating. We've conducted extensive research on the city and the city government. I mean, there's a reason this one folder is full of reports. Every single thing that you had available, the city manager has provided me, your annual comprehensive financial report, all the information about the different departments. What's great is you have a lot of good stuff on your website that I was able to draw on, In fact, what I really liked was the city council actually articulated their objectives on the website. Like each of you said, and then I looked for like recurring themes, like 3 of you said public safety, and I think there were a couple that said like stormwater management, and I thought that was really good. So, and then we looked at everything about the city, all the, the UF Beaver demographic data, right? In other words, it's a research-driven process. The more we know, the better we can serve you. The more information we have, the better. We'll never know the city and the city government as well as you do, but we want to know as much as we possibly can, right? The next step after today's orientation is in 2 weeks, we'll be sitting down and interviewing you and going, okay, and you have the interview questions. That's great. We're giving you the test, questions before the test, correct? So you can show up having already written out the answers if you want, or you don't have to write out answers and just you've thought about it. But at least you've thought about it. You've thought about mission, vision, values, goals, objectives. You've thought about a SWOT analysis. You've thought about what you want to see happen during the workshop where we are working together to write the plan together, right? Then we'll do an electronic survey. And one more time, that's another opportunity to collect data about what people expect in the way of mission, vision, values, goals, and objectives. We'll also give people a chance to rank things too. Because can we do everything for everybody all at once? No. And so this, the prioritization aspect of strategic planning is also helpful. And then we'll have we'll have community participation, and we're going to be discussing with your leadership, how they want to do that and how they want to engage with the community and get ideas and input and have the benefit of the recommendations of citizens for the strategic plan. Then we're going to be doing, then we actually do a workshop where we are all writing the plan together. I'm up here with a flip chart with Dr. Levy, and we go, okay, who's got an objective? Objective 1, I write it out. Okay, what's your strategy for it? What are your tactics for it? What timeline, what resources, what metrics, what personnel are involved, right? And I literally can walk out with that pad, and I've got the draft plan. And so all of you helped write the plan together, once again, based on all this research that we've been doing. It's a multi-stage, multi-sequence process, right? And at the workshop, we'll discuss the research. We'll then discuss mission, vision, values, goals, and objectives. We'll discuss like a summary action plan for each objective. Okay, what would be the key steps for that one? Then there'll be a draft plan generated that will get reviewed by the city manager, and I'm sure there'll be recommendations and revisions. There will be a point where there's a final plan approved by the, presented to the city council. City council then can review, revise, make changes, but eventually adopt. And then it goes back to the team to implement and evaluate, right? And what's great is people get to see positive progress. And they get to see things getting done. And that feels good. And that's energizing. I think I've hammered SMART objectives pretty good today. So once again, the plan is focused on objectives. Don't get me wrong, we're also addressing mission, vision, values, goals, but really it's, well, what are we getting done and how are we getting it done, you know? So once again, please bring to those interviews your ideas on mission, vision, values, goals, and objectives. Be thinking of the summary implementation plan for each objective. And review the handouts that I provided you. In other words, they're good examples of what we're talking about doing and what we're going to be doing together. So once again, this is a multi-sequence, multi-step process. And at this point, you know, we've been doing a lot of research on the city and city government. Today is the orientation. Here are the next several steps in the process. And I'll come back to this in a second. I wanted to show you a video. So I know people are familiar with Peter Drucker, right? He's a leading management theorist of the 20th century in America. And here's a really good example of strategic change. And here's that's very positive for citizens. And of course, it's also a good example of alignment, right? I have to change some things in the operations and activities in order to achieve the objectives, right? And so we're going to look at his case study is the director of a DMV who makes it a lot more customer friendly to come to the DMV.
So I said to my secretary at that time, Dana, and I said, could you schedule at least 3 hours next week
Can everybody
at the Department
hear it,
of
or
Motor Vehicles? Because
do I
that's
need to turn it
about
up?
how long it takes them to beat you up. And so I went over there, and I walked in the front door, and I knew something had happened. Because this woman charged me, and she said, welcome to the...
Any idea how I can hike that up a little bit? Okay.
So I said to my secretary at that time, Dana, and I said, could you schedule at least 3 hours next week
Can you hear
at
that
the
now?
Department of Motor Vehicles? Because that's about how long it takes them to beat you up. And so I went over there, and I walked in the front door, and I knew something had happened. Because this woman charged me, and she said, welcome to the Department of Motor Vehicles. Do you speak English or Spanish? I said English. She said, right over there. The guy behind the desk said, welcome to the Department of Motor Vehicles. How may I help you? It took me 9 minutes to renew my license, including taking my picture. So I said to this woman taking my picture, what are you all smoking here? You know, I mean, this isn't the department I used to know and love. And she said, haven't you met the new director? It's always a leader. It's always a leader. It's always a leader. And I said, where is this new director? And they had these, kind of shelves or not, whatever, counters in the front, and then going down the side. They welcomed you here. You took your pictures down here. Out behind the counters, no privacy, all is the desk. She said, there's the new director. No private office, no nothing. So I went out to meet this guy. And I said, what's your job as the director of the Department of Motor Vehicles? Write this down or put it on your forehead. It's a wonderful definition of a manager. He said, my job is to reorganize the department on a moment-to-moment basis, depending on citizen need. You know what he had done? He had cross-trained everybody in everybody's job, so everybody could take pictures, everybody could run the front desk, including secretaries and bookkeepers in the back of the house, who if there was a run-on by citizens, he said, that's not mission critical, get out here, the citizens out here. Nobody could go to lunch between 11:30 and 2. Why? That's when the citizens are free. And so this guy is really amazing. Now, just to show you how amazing it is, shortly after this, my secretary turned 50, and she decided that she was going to get one of those mopeds or one of those scooter deals, and she's going to bop around Southern California. So she gets this beauty, and she never even thought about a license. You know, she thought car license, you know, moped, you know. No, you got to get a license. So she goes over to the Department of Motor Vehicles. She gives her name to this woman behind the counter. She said, she looks at it, and Dana had never had a ticket in her life. Not one mark on her whole license. And this woman says, that's incredible, your record. And she said, I'm looking at it, though. In 3 months, you're supposed to come back to take your written driver's license again. Why don't you take both tests today? Dana said, tests? I didn't know I was supposed to take a test. And she's panicked. I don't know if they were teaching these people human relations, but this woman reached across the counter, patted her hand. Oh, Dana, with your driving record, I'm sure you can pass this test. And besides, if you don't, you can always come back. So I want to tell you, one of the interesting things, before I tell you what happened, is I recognize some of the people in this place, and they were people who used to beat citizens up. And now they're cheering them on. What do you think the difference is? Leadership.
What'd you think? Not everybody at once. What were all the changes that the leader made?
Empowered his employees.
Excellent.
Train everybody at each different section of the business.
Yep, cross-training. Excellent.
And he knew everybody in the organization.
Great. Any other ones that caught your attention?
Employees the power to do their job.
Right. If there was a way to better serve the customer, I want you to do it. There's a way to improve.
And he knew his customers.
Knew the customers, like what time they would
Be free.
come to the DMV, correct?
Everyone was cordial. My pleasure.
Culture of customer service, right? Right? Made sure he designed kind of the workflow and the customer flow so it was as efficient and quick and easy as and convenient as possible. Why do you think, by the way, he had his desk out front like that?
Put himself in the front line.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So they know he's there.
He was in the trenches with the employees.
Yeah, it's good for morale. He could pitch in and help out if there was a long line. He was probably getting good real-time information as to how well things were going or not going. Yeah, absolutely. So here's my question for you. Can you do that in the public sector? Can you lead positive change in the public sector?
Of course.
Good. I'm thrilled to hear that. I'm thrilled to hear that. Because the joke I always tell is when I was 16 and I got my driver's license, I'm originally from South Florida, the lady who was taking the picture, you know, for the license, she had a sign up that said, if you want a better picture, bring a better face. Right? Now, I kid you not. I kid you not. Now, meanwhile, when I go in now, you know, the tax collectors now handle it, correct? Yeah. Right? And that was a big change in Florida. But, you know, now when you go in there, and you know what I'm going to say, they'll actually go, let me show you your picture. Do you like it? Yeah. And if you go, you don't like it, they'll go, well, let me take another one. You know what I mean? And so that so government really can provide a culture of customer service, and government really can innovate, and government really can look for efficiencies, and government can achieve performance gains, you know? But I just think that's a really good example. And of course, the leader was thinking strategically and had a strategic plan for the organization to ensure that they would now, their brand, their image, their identity would now be excellent customer service, right? I've done enough talking. Questions?
So let me ask you, that was innovation from back in the days when you got your license, because at the time, I believe they were taking Polaroids and they were laminating over them. Nowadays, we have computers, and now it's easier to change. It cost money back then to change because it was using Polaroids.
Sure.
I'm just saying.
No. Technology, technology can definitely be a change generator. No question. No question. Questions about strategic planning?
Coming from a department, hold on, let me do myself a favor. Coming from a department that interacts with everybody else
Right.
As a technology standpoint, how would my department go about defining those pieces and still helping other people meet their pieces?
I think it's a great question. I think, you are now central to the operation in ways that were unthinkable decades ago, correct?
That is
Because
correct.
everything is, my IT infrastructure, e-government for citizens, all the information I capture and analyze and store, it's critical, right?
Correct.
And so, I hope I'm answering the question correctly. You were able to choose department-specific objectives, right, for the plan. You were also able to choose organizational-wide objectives for the plan. But I like your thinking in that you're thinking of other departments when you choose your objectives. You know?
It's like even 5 years ago, nobody would have told me that technology would be the absolutely Achilles heel of a business, or feeling like you're a general in a war sometimes.
Right.
But also that I'm having a hard time finding trackable metrics for what we do.
Right.
And so trying to get some guidelines on trying to figure out what I need to focus on, because
Okay.
I focus so much on the overall goals that it's hard to set as like identifiable drivers within my department.
Mm-hmm. Right off the top of my head, national and statewide associations of, let's say, public sector IT professionals and managers, they often are sources of metrics. Professional publications that public sector IT managers and professionals read can be a source of metrics. Federal government and state government agencies can also be a source of potential metrics. Your professional peers, like you may participate in conferences and you may have relationships with other IT directors around the state, and asking them, what are some of the metrics that you employ that would be specific, measurable, relevant, actionable for me? In other words, you're right, we don't always have the exact right metric for everything, but I generally can suggest sources to members of the team. Have you looked at this for potential metrics for what you do? Once you decide what, the metrics are going to match the objectives. So once you figure out the objectives, right? So let me just make up one. The objective is we're going to close out an employee IT request unless it's an extraordinarily complex within 72 hours. Well, then the metric becomes speed. The metric becomes the 72 hours, So your objective will help you select the metric. So I would think more in terms of the objectives before you get to the metrics, because generally the objective will point you to the metric. And the metric is generally going to concern one of the big E's: effectiveness, did I get the right result? Efficiency, did we get the most outputs for the least inputs, Or equity, did we actually, fairly and equally serve who we were supposed to help and serve, I think those sources I mentioned, and we can have this discussion too during the interviews, where you go, I'm thinking about these objectives. Where might I get good metrics for these objectives? And we can kind of think through it together. You being the subject matter expert, you know, Dr. Levy and I being the folks who advise local governments throughout the state all the time on different issues, and, you know, and usually can recommend specific resources to find that information. It's a great question.
Now, don't you have to go back to your customer when you deal with that? I mean, she has to deal with what her customers, and her customers really aren't the public. Her customers are these
Right.
people here.
Right.
And then it seems to me that, of course, I spent a long time in IT. Your customer from an IT perspective is not only are you providing them services like employee IDs, you know, I'm going to close those out in 72 hours. That's one thing, but you're part of their objectives as well.
Right.
So the objectives that you develop is first and foremost, how do you satisfy your customer? And then secondly, how do you support your customer?
Right.
And that makes it somewhat difficult for an internal department like IT, but they can be done.
Right.
The next important thing is that the measurements cannot cost you more than the objective.
Right.
That's the problem that's the problem we had 8 months ago, 9 months ago, is we had measurements that actually were costing departments more time and energy than what they were measuring.
Yeah.
And you have to be very careful. You don't destroy yourself by adding 2 people's worth of work in every department to put together measurements. So the way you produce a measurement has to be as automatic as possible. She doesn't have to sit down and count every ID she does, because you know when you get the ID, you put it out. And it should be something measurable, automatically measurable, or as close to automatically as possible, as opposed to spending lots of time and energy and money on that. So,
I think you're right on the money. All metrics don't necessarily matter.
Right.
And some metrics that's why I differentiate between like outputs and outcomes. Some metrics are more valuable than others. And some metrics, once you do a cost-benefit analysis or return on investment, you go, I spent more time, energy, and effort and money getting that metric than the metric actually informing me on how to be more effective and efficient.
Right.
So the great thing about what each of you do professionally is you're subject matter experts. And generally there's consensus, whether it's an external customer or an internal customer. And by the way, with customers, sometimes I ask them, you know, what do you value? What would be the right metric? But there's generally consensus within each profession or industry, if you will, about these metrics matter. The data is easily accessible. The data is valid and reliable. The data is measurable. The data would actually influence how I do things. And the costs of obtaining the data don't exceed the benefits of having it. We're going to work through that. In other words, it's not unusual to have this discussion at this point in the process about which metrics matter, which metrics don't. But we'll get there as to which ones you really want to use and not use.
And I think for the IT, we're not only the internal departments, but unlike a lot of cities, we also have the public aspect that we also have to deal with, and I'm having a real hard time quantifying what I need to metricize, because we're all over the place. And so that's going forward. I'm trying to work with the other departments, figure out what they're doing in order to help set our objectives.
Right.
So
I've always liked to just keep it simple. And I think one of the main things is to look at the why. Why are we doing this? And then that will lead you to what kind of metrics you want to look at. And then over the period of time, you're going to have more innovation, which could make, you know, everything much easier.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good starting point.
Yeah, one of the things that I heard from a consultant, consultants have been around for a long time, and they do a good job. So, was use the so what analysis. If you ask yourself, do I need this? Then you might just ask yourself, well, so what? So what if I don't do it? So what if I don't measure it? And what's the impact of that?
Right.
And
right.
because you want to get to the point where you're measuring the critical things and not measuring everything so that you don't get the critical things done.
Right.
That's the important thing to
Right.
do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Other thoughts, observations, questions, comments?
Dr. Saviak, I think it's probably a good opportunity, just in case any members of the public want to say anything. Does anyone from the public want to speak on anything that was discussed today?
Terry?
Barbecue.
Thank you, Doctor. I probably won't be here for the whole process through because I'm leaving in May, but there's one subject that came up in your session. You talked about a constraint of money over goal. And I know from my process in the budgeting advisory board that one of the key items in the city is stormwater management. Next to waste management is probably the most talked about subject in the public. And I also know that we're behind on the budget. We never had enough revenue to do what the goals were. And it was suggested in the last year that maybe not maybe, but we really should add $2 or $3 or $4 to the tax roll to try and keep up with Brevard County, who added 1% to their sales tax to handle that. The answer was, we really can't do that right now because we're dealing with waste management and none of us will get reelected if we push that forward. So I think as this process goes forward, that you need to reverse the money versus constraint on that issue and say you need to get the money and avoid the constraint. The city, I've heard too many times, well, we got to keep the taxes down, and sometimes that's the detriment of the city. And I really applaud this city council because they realize and they're moving ahead to fix the city and not put lower taxes as the number one item. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
So, Dr. Saviak, I'll just, now that we're closed public input, one of the things that I'll just kind of, and department heads will have this discussion. I want to stay away from getting too far down into the weeds with this. This is going to be a higher level strategic plan that we're going to really see what our citizens and what council wants us to get accomplished. And so when we're looking at our objectives and our metrics and how we're going to measure things, I think it was stated perfectly that I don't want you all spending a lot of time trying to find metrics and objectives on items that, you know, are further down in the weeds and things that, yes, we need to accomplish, we need to get done, but it really needs to be higher level items. And that's one of the things that we're going to work on from my standpoint, and I'll pass along some ideas to each department on what I think, you know, we kind of need to hone in on and going forward once we know really the direction that we're given as far as our strategic, I like to call them strategic pillars that will drive everything that we do, that we need to make sure we align with those. So as we have those and continue to move forward in this process. So I just want to make that clear that we're not going to go down and measure every single park that we mow or every building permit that comes through the department. Those are things that I'm not interested in measuring from a smaller scale look at this. So just want to clarify that.
Good comment. Anybody else?
I see I only got a half hour with you on the 15th.
You want to fill it?
He needs 22 minutes, not a half hour.
So I believe every council member should have an hour. And I think department heads only have 30 minutes.
I believe that's correct.
So council, you all should have an hour. And I think there's a little bit of a gap in there, so, with your meetings.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, as much time as you want to spend and articulate, and it really varies. I mean, there are times where people walk in, they've got their one pager, and they go through all the 5 priorities, and they're in and out in 22 minutes, like you said, you know?
For me, it'll be 10 or 15.
Right, oh yeah. And then there are other times where people like to have a more extended conversation, and, you know, we're trying to achieve what you want to achieve. And so that's best done by very carefully listening to you and hearing all your ideas, input, recommendations, and direction. And so I really look forward to the conversations. You know, I can tell from the comments today, you all have obviously been giving plenty of thought about, you know, what this process should look like and what it should do and what it should achieve and your role in it. And that's very positive. You know, when the organization goes, we believe in this, we will make this happen, and we will get the results, really extraordinary things can happen, you know? I mean, we can cite examples of really exceptional results in organizations that when they really embrace it and they internalize it and they go, I'm all in and I'm going all out, some really wonderful things happen.
I just wanted to bring up, and I know we have plenty of steps before we get on to community events and workshops, but I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and it doesn't exactly relate to this, but it kind of does. You know how like church attendance is way on the decline, and so churches are having to find other ways to reach people. And I think the same is true with city government, with the younger generations. As we see in our council meetings, we don't really have anyone under the age of probably 60 attending, unless, like, you know, the charter school students who are forced to attend too. Yeah. Except for, you know, charter students that are forced to attend to a school year. So I want us to try to find creative methods to get out into the community, to get that community involvement for our younger families who are very much increasing in our town. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Excellent point. Anybody else? Any input, feedback, ideas concerning? Once again, this is your process and your plan and your results.
Dr. Sammy, did you give us the form that you say some come with it prepared?
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. There wasn't a specific form, although that's a great question. I'm saying some people just, you know, generate like a one-page Word document and they walk in already. Well, I'm sorry, let me back up. The interview questions are going out to everybody, right?
Yes.
And so you will have the interview questions 2 weeks in advance of the interviews. So you'll have plenty of time to think through them, think your answers through. Whether you write your answers down or not, I mean, that's totally up to you. You just may go, hey, I've read the questions, I have a good idea of what I want to say, and you say that during the interviews. But we're going to get those interview questions out to you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. But like I said, too, feel free beyond that if you just go, hey, I had some other ideas in addition to the interview questions. Great. You know, we like to provide as much freedom and flexibility as possible within the process, because that way, you know, you're engaging the most people and you're getting, you know, more brains, more ideas, better ideas, you know. Well, you've been an absolutely wonderful team today to have this orientation, and excellent questions and input and ideas, and we're very, very much looking forward to working closely with you. And we love nothing more than seeing organizations really succeed and excel and do things that they They're already doing good things, but now they get to do even more good things and maybe some great things. And we love to be a part of that process. So thank you very much for having us.
Thank you. Brian, I got one more comment I'd like to make if I can before we go on. Some of you have been here long enough to know that we have strategic plans on the shelf. The city has gone through this exercise before. The difference this time, in my opinion, is that, and I'll say it this way, my first year on council, I brought up strategic planning. And because I ran for, one of the tenets that I ran on when I ran in 2016 was we need to do a strategic plan. We need to do a stormwater plan. We need to do these plans. I brought up the strategic plan, and one of the council members, I won't say who, said, oh, that's that book we put on the shelf and never look at. And that's exactly what was done with the prior strategic plans. Money was spent to produce a strategic plan. They were put on the bookshelf and no one ever looked at them. Unless I'm totally reading Brian wrong, which I don't believe I am, that's not going to happen this time. And I'm not reading the council members wrong in the comments that they've made about strategic planning. And no one on the council believes that this book is going to go on a shelf and never get pulled down. What they believe is, and what I understand that Brian believes is, my opinion, is that the strategic plan is going to be in your offices and he's going to expect you to go to it. And it's going to be something that the council is going to expect when we see budgets, when we see purchase orders. I'm going to expect, for example, on a request to purchase a truck, how that fits within the planning process. The budget's going to have to tie to the strategic plan. That's where you get to what Terry was talking about. If your objective is to do more stormwater stuff, then you have to tie that to resources, and resources are budgets. So basically all this stuff has to balance, and that's what I've heard from these people up here as we talked about it. That's what I've heard from Brian as he and I talked about it. So I just want to make sure you all are this is not a wasted effort in the opinion of the people that are up here. We want to turn this into tactical activities that we're going to perform on an annualized basis. We want to tie those into the budget process so we know we have the revenue to do it. We're going to have to tie that into this nasty thing called the community perception issue, because perception is reality to everybody outside this room. Well, maybe to some people in this room. Perception is reality, and the fact that we produce a plan makes them think we're planning. The fact that we follow the plan makes them comfortable that we're running our city the best way we can. And that's exactly what they want to see from us. I mean, I've seen, we all get, Brian gets them, I'm sure you all get them. I know Kelly gets them because I've seen some of the communications about, why isn't this ditch cut, or why isn't this done, or why isn't this done? And so we have to tie this. We want the public to perceive that we're doing a good job with their money, with their resources, and with their city. And then we want them to perceive that the next time we want to annex 1,000 acres, that we're not going to screw it up, because we're planning a process. We're trying to do the job correctly. And they think that we're trying to run the city the best way possible to do that. That's the overall objective here, to do that. So I'm comfortable. I don't believe, and it's taken me 5 years on the council to get comfortable that this would be done, quite frankly. And nothing against the council members, because every one of these 5 people here have all, as we began this process, are all very, very heavily pushing towards the strategic planning process. So it's a different world, I think, than it was the last time they did that here. And it's something that we have to do. The email I saw that you wrote to the one woman who was complaining about her truck not being able to get her not being able to pull a trailer through something on one of the streets over there, and your explanation was, well, we've already repaved part of that street and we didn't want to screw it up as we were doing this, so we put something on top of the paving not to mess it up. All right. Well, that's the kind of thing that if we process that correctly, that's the kind of thing that we use Avery or someone like that to communicate. So part of our process would be, not only are we going to do that work, we're going to communicate it correctly. And that's another thing that Brian has done. Bringing her on board has been a great, if you haven't looked at Facebook and the stuff she's put on there, go look at it. It's really good. And so we need to, it's all got to be one big centralized process that we move forward on. And the perception of the community is as important as the execution of the plan, and we need to make sure we tie those together. They don't judge us based on the reality of what we do. They judge us on what they think we do. And I'm not talking about just the elected officials. I mean, if someone doesn't want to vote for me because they don't think I'm doing a good job, that's fine, don't vote for me. But if someone comes in here every day and screams at you guys, you're not going to be able to do your job. That's the difference. I don't get voted back in office, but you know that. Elected officials come and go. You guys have to be here forever and run the city. So this is as much for you as it is for them. Okay? So thank you.
Did you just say Ken's not retiring?
Hmm?
Did you just say Ken's not retiring?
We've already told Ken he can't retire. And he's here. He retired 2 months ago and he's here. I think Ken wants to see this strategic plan through before he finally leaves.
I can't argue with that.
All right, thanks.
Excellent points, Mr. Mayor. Anybody else? All right, well, I'll close this out then. Sure. Thank you very, very much for your time, your engagement, participation, and patience and understanding. Like I said, I know there was probably a number of some of the content that you go, golly, I could get up there and teach that. I know that. But it's positive reinforcement. But it always gets everybody in the right frame of mind. Hey, here's what we're trying to achieve. Here are the benefits that will accrue. Here's the process that we're following. Here's my role and responsibilities in it. And let's move forward and on to victory.
That essentially was your strategic plan for us creating a strategic.
Yes, sir. That's a wonderful way to put it. Yeah. Yeah.